Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy my videos. I'm currently growing the channel and I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you could support me. And today's deck is going to be focused around Sauron the Dark Lord. For 3 colors, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. It's a legendary creature, Avatar Horror, 7/6 with wards. Sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass Orc Swan. Whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. And whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 4 cards. So he is fantastic. He does so many different things. There's so many different abilities that you can build around here, and we're going to try to build around all of them. First off, the ward is really good, and it's very difficult for your opponents to deal with, and it's definitely going to be costly every time they do, so you can guarantee that this is going to sit in play for a good while. The second ability that is going to make orcs every time an opponent casts a spell is going to result in a very big army on your part, and it's going to take resources for your opponents to keep dealing with this as the game goes on. That seems great. The temptation is pretty good, and we have a lot of tempt effects in this deck to build around that because refilling our hand is just fantastic. But then apart from all of that, we're also building around ring wraiths. We have a ring wraith kind of synergy deck, and you'll see we have a bunch of ways to copy our ring wraiths and a bunch of tribal cards that are going to work very well with our wraiths. So without further ado, let's get started. And we're starting with Archfiend of Ifnir. This is a really cool one. Because of the way Sauron's tempting ability works, we're going to be discarding our hand a lot to draw cards, so it's nice if we can get some value from those discard effects, and obviously putting a bunch of -1/-1 counters on our opponent's creatures is pretty fantastic. Gandalf, Friend of the Shire, is not very flavorful, but I didn't want him to be in there because we're doing so much tempting in this deck, and we shouldn't be choosing him ever to be our ring bearer. So that means that each tempt we're getting is going to draw us an extra card. With Sauron out, we can discard our hand first and then draw a card, which is great. The sorcery part isn't super relevant, but it can occasionally come up too. Rima, Saruman's Footman, is really cool as a way to play cards from our opponent's deck. It doesn't have massive synergy with the deck, but I just thought it was such a cool and interesting card. Imperial Recruiter is there to search up a Nazgul so we can start getting our Nazgul train going. It actually can search off a bunch of other things as well, so it's just a good card. Lord of the Nazgul can be a great way to start trying to close out the game. Seeing as we have a bunch of wraiths anyway, we don't even need to trigger his ability much for this to immediately just pump all of our wraiths into 9/9 monstrosities. They also keep their counters, which is really fantastic and means that this can be a fantastic finisher in this deck as long as we can protect it. Mahur Uruk-hai Captain is going to work so well with Sauron the Dark Lord. Usually in red-black we don't really have that many counter synergies cards, but this one is definitely going to get us there by giving us an extra counter every time we trigger Sauron's ability. We have 9 different Nazgul cards in this deck. They are the main thing the deck is built around. They're going to tempt us when they come into play, and then they're going to pump all of our wraiths permanently whenever one of them comes into play. Since we have so many ways of copying them and duplicating them, this is going to be really, really strong. Orcish Bowmasters is just an insane magic card, and I want to try it out in this deck since it fits very well flavorfully. It doesn't have any particular synergy with the deck other than the amass, so feel free to cut it for something else if you want. Pathan Matcher is great once we already have a Nazgul out, because then it allows us to immediately search for another Nazgul and put it straight into our hand. That's a pretty good ability. Ring Wraiths is great, particularly when we get to copy it multiple times thanks to our copy effects, and we can also keep returning it from our graveyard after it dies, so it works really well with Sauron's ability, and it's just a really solid card overall. Saruman the White Hand plays well into our amass strategy by giving our huge amass token ward 2, and then also amassing every time we play a non-creature spell. Sauron Lord of the Rings is very flavorful, and it's going to just be a huge top-end finisher that can amass, return something from our graveyard. It's just an incredibly powerful way to finish off our curve. Sauron the Necromancer is another interesting one. Since we can reanimate stuff from the graveyard, it's going to be really good. And we have so many tempting effects that it's very easy to make this our ring bearer, meaning that whatever we reanimate, we get to keep permanently. Street Wraith is a wraith, which is something that this deck is built around. We can actually copy it, and Swamp Walk isn't irrelevant, but then we can also just cycle it if we need to and get it back later. Witch King of Angmar fills a bunch of different roles. It really dissuades our opponent from attacking us, which is fantastic. And since we should have quite a few cards in this deck, it's also really nice to be able to make it indestructible. And Witch King, Bringer of Ruin, can be really annoying on attack, particularly if they only have a small flyer to block it. They might find that they can't block it at all if they have to sacrifice it. Very solid card. For artifacts, we have Inherited Envelope. This is a pretty normal mana rock, but the Tempting is very good in this deck, so we definitely want to include it here. Mithril Coat is a great way to protect our commander, and the main reason we have it in here is because it's a legendary artifact, and as you'll see, we are running Mount Doom, so we need a few legendary artifacts. Phial of Galadriel is similarly a legendary artifact. It works very well, ironically, with Sauron, because we need to discard our hand with his third ability, which means that the first card we're going to draw off of his trigger is going to draw twice. That makes this a really solid include in this deck. Relic of Sauron is a decent mana rock that can give us some good card advantage late game. Shadow Spear can give our huge army lifelink. That's pretty relevant. And then also it's a legendary artifact, which as we mentioned is important in this deck. Stone of Eric is another legendary artifact that is going to give us a nice little bit of graveyard hate for our opponents, and it can also draw us a card. The One Ring is another legendary artifact which is very flavorful with Sauron, and obviously it's a great way to protect us from dying, and it can even draw some cards, although unless we have lifelink out, we probably want to be careful with that. The Ozolith is another legendary artifact that allows us to keep the counters from our army so that we don't really lose them if it gets removed. And Whip of Erebos is another legendary artifact that is also going to give all of our creatures lifelink, which is something we definitely want in this deck. For instance, we have an Offer You Can't Refuse to protect our board very cheaply. Cackling Counterpart works really well by creating token copies of our Nazgul or other Wraiths, which is a great ability to have. Glorious Gale tempts us if we counter a legendary creature, which is really solid. Kazul's Fury is great in this deck because we get to sacrifice our huge army in response to removal and often finish the game on the spot. Nasty End is going to work really well in this deck since we have so much tempting, which makes the creature legendary. Sauron's Ransom is just a fun, flavorful card that I want to try out. Stinging Study is going to draw 6 cards at instant speed for 5 mana. You can't get much better rate than that. Moving on to enchantments, we have Call of the Ring, which is obviously going to be great here since we're being tempted so much. All we need to do is pay 2 life and we can draw a card. Obviously that is going to add up, so that's why there are a couple of life gain effects in the deck. In the Darkness Bind Them is a really fun saga that's going to make a bunch of Wraiths and tempt us, which are both things that our deck is built around, so it works super well. And then when we reach chapter 4, we can go for a nice finishing move. Kindred Discovery is fantastic when we choose Wraiths. We suddenly get to draw a ton of cards every time we make a Wraith or attack. Molten Echoes is similarly really good once we name Wraiths. The Nazgul all have ETBs, so getting a token copy of them and immediately buffing our board and tempting us is really fantastic. One Ring to Rule Them All tempts us, and if we have a particularly big army and we choose it as our ring bearer, we can suddenly mill them for like 40 or 50 cards that might be able to close off the game. It's also a decent board wipe that can leave our biggest creatures alive if we wanted to, and then the last part can really finish off the game if the opponent's graveyards are full. Reflections of Littjara is another excellent card with our Nazgul tribal theme because we're going to be getting a copy of each Wraith we play. For sorceries, we have Replication Technique can make a bunch of copies of Wraiths, which is always good. Ringsight gives us a nice tempting effect, and then it's going to allow us to search for something in our library. Visions of Ruin can be cast for fairly cheaply on the front side and the back, and it's going to provide us some ramp. And Widespread Brutality is a pretty flavorful board wipe, but if you want something a bit more high power, you might want to find something a bit more unconditional. For lands, we have Mines of Moria. It's a nice way to make some artifacts and ramp late game. Since we're filling up our graveyard so much, this is pretty good. Mount Doom is going to be at its best in this deck. This is going to be a great way to just have a huge game-winning spell from our land slot. We have quite a few legendary artifacts, so it shouldn't be very difficult to get this to work. Rivendell, again, is probably very likely to come in untapped with all the tempting we're doing, and scrying is always welcome. Rogue's Passage is a great way to finish off the game by giving our huge army unblockable. Shizo, Death's Storehouse can do the same thing because our army can be easily made legendary with the tempting, and the Black Gate is again another way to make our huge army unblockable. So there you have it. This has been our Sauron the Dark Lord deck tech. What do you think about this one? Are there any different ways you would build it or different cards you would add or remove? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care. Woo!